Dynamics. Henk Akkermans here. Supply Network Dynamics Chapter 3, Part 3, Filters of Rationality. What we have to realize is that our vision of reality is and has always been blurred by a number of filters. So there's little me, but there's also cognitive filters around those cognitive filters, behavioral filters, around those organizational filters, and around those strategic filters. And we start with the rational filters. So I teach in a school of economics, and in economics the standard assumption has long been that of Homo economicus. At least it was until a couple of decades ago. And the core assumption is that humans are fully rational. They make optimal decisions. They have a complete access to information, and they're mainly at maximizing entities. They maximize utilities as consumers and profits as producers. And of course, in the real world, that's a silly assumption, but it's very helpful in many of the mathematical calculations. It's silly because, well, here's an example from one of our major thinkers in this area, Irita Singh. He says, well, let's suppose that you have two true economic men, and one of them meets the other, and he asks, where's the railway station? And the other one says, well, it's there. And he actually points at the post office. Why? Well, because there's no utility by helping the other person, but he does have a utility of having his letter posted. So he asks, would you post this letter for me on the way? And the other person says yes, but the only reason he does so is not to help the other person, but to make sure that, that he sees if there is something valuable in that envelope. And that's just not the way the world works. So even from a ethical aspect, it isn't correct, but also the rationality assumption just isn't correct. This goes back to well, stuff of more than 60 years ago. Herbert Simon, one of my heroes, intellectual at least, he said, well, Homo economicus is not just dead, he simply never existed. He pointed out a couple of things. First of all, if you want rationality, you need complete knowledge. And also you need to have a full anticipation of all the consequences. But in fact, you don't have complete knowledge, leave alone that you can figure out all the possible consequences. Secondly, these consequences lie in the future. So how do you anticipate the value that you may have to a certain sensation in the future? Well, you may promise that, you know what, you get a burger from me tomorrow, but tomorrow you just had root canal surgery, so you're not really into it. And the third one is rationality requires a choice among all possible behaviors. But people don't actually have a look at all the possible behaviors. So Simon came with the notion of bounded rationality. Yes, we are rational, but in a certain bounded way. We aim for satisfying solutions rather than optimal solution. Satisfying, good enough, that's the way we work. Simon is not alone in that area, even in a broader area of philosophy of science. There is not just such a thing as objective observation. Take this picture. It's tempting to see that the higher yellow bar is greater than the lower one, but because we are helped with the red lines, we can see that actually it isn't. But it's tempting, that's an illusion. So we have, if you show this to people who have not been trained in thinking in dimension, in seeing depth, they have no problem at all with this, but because we see these rail tracks and we assume that there is a perspective going here, we assume that something which is farther away is greater. So there are limits to our observation powers. We always carry with us some kind of theory. First of all, there's a theory loadedness in what we pay attention to. Things that we investigate. I mention here as a silly example, female composers. There are no female composers. Well, if you go back in theory, go back in history, you'll find lots of those. Another one that has always surprised me: the Earth is flat. Yes, but if I stand on the beach near near our coast, then I actually can see some curve in the going from one area to another, and I can also see that a boat from afar is gradually becoming visible. So you can see the curve. Why didn't we focus attention on it? Well, because we knew the Earth was flat. So why bother with something, some illusion that suggests that it's curved? Also, what you see is theory loaded. So what you investigate is always determined by your background knowledge. I am remembered of I am triggered by a memory of a story of a group of, I think, pygmies that was shown a movie of New York City. And after the movie they were asked, okay, what did you see? And of course they saw subways, they saw skyscrapers, cars, all sorts of machinery. And what they said, we saw a chicken. A chicken? Yeah, we saw a chicken. Come on, this was a movie in New York City. There is no chicken in it. This is skyscrapers, etc. But when the investigators, the anthropologists, went back to the original picture, then they saw that indeed, for just a brief moment, there was a chicken in the movie. And that was the only part of the entire movie that the pygmies could relate to. So their theories didn't allow them to see, to understand that they were looking at subway, trains, cars and skyscrapers. But they had a theory for chicken. Also, what you report on your observation is theory loaded. It's colored by your other experiences. Quite obvious if you think of it, but quite tricky if you want to assume full rationality. Well, economics hasn't stood still since then, and a fertile branch of research has been what is called principal-agent theory. And the problem is sort of like this. I have a principal and I have an agent, and the principal wants something done by the agent. He could have done it himself, but he rather wants it to be done by the agent. Now, how do you devise a contract in such a way between the agent and the principal that the agent does what the principal wants, while even when the principal isn't watching all the time? And the job to be done is, for instance, the task of managing the company. And even there are doubts if that's at all possible. Here is a quote from Roberts, who wrote a very good book, The Modern Firm. It was actually the Economist Book of the Year in 2004. And he points at the problem of, suppose that you have two incentives. And somebody has to do two things. One of these agents has to do two things. But the one thing, the one task is very clearly measurable and quickly measurable, and the other one is not so measurable quickly and not so measurably clearly. Now, what can you expect? You can expect that the strong incentives for the well-measured ones, they will get done, and the other one, the less well-measured ones, the intangible ones, well, perhaps if there's time. Often the financial short-term ones are easier measurable. The things like quality, customer reputation, ethical behavior, etc., they are much weaker. So what do you expect economic agents to do? Well, to choose the clearer measurable one. Okay.